In this video, we're going to continue our style configuration system. Here we're going to address the code that will be needed to load up all of our settings that are currently stored in an XML file.
Cool. We've got the XML file. We just need a way to use it.
So what we're going to do is we're going to turn our attention to the style class that we had created earlier to manage texture assets and provide them to make them accessible to the rest of the game. We'll use the same style class to load in and contain all of our style configuration settings.
Okay.
So we'll load up our style.cs source file. Before we get started on any code, we'll drop in a using statement because we're going to need access to the system.xml namespace. So we'll say using system.xml.
Cool.
All right. Now, before we jump into the style class itself, we're actually going to add a few more things before the class. We're actually going to add a couple of structs to represent the different sections that we originally had inside of this configuration file. You'll notice we have nice, cleanly defined sections, one for colors and one for positions. It would be helpful if we could have a similar structure inside of the code itself. This would make it easier when we're elsewhere in the game and we're needing to address a specific color or a specific position. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a couple of structs. We'll name one of them style colors and style positions. And that just makes it one layer easier to gain access to things. An alternate to this is we could put all of the fields inside of style, but then we'd be looking for something like style.colors.something or style.color_background.
Okay.
By adding these structs, this is purely an organizational thing that lets us say later as the designer in code, we can say, all right, I need access to a color, therefore I'm going to look at style colors. And by looking at style colors, I'm not going to have to worry about looking at positions or textures or anything else.
Sure.
Just organization to keep things clean. So let's put these two structs into place. The first of which, is, of course, is going to be called style colors. And the second is going to be style positions. Now, we're going to need to add a series of fields, one field to match each node that was originally in the style XML file.
So this will be a lot of typing again.
Exactly. We just have a lot of different names that need to be put into place as fields. We'll address style colors first. Now, before we actually put the fields we're going to use in, we're going to put a default. Since we're looking at colors here, we're actually going to define a default color. And the reason we're going to do this is so that we have an obvious color that the fields will get set to, just in case that the configuration loading didn't work. We're also going to pick a color that's not used anywhere else in the game currently.
So something separate from that yellow we were using in the XML file.
Right. In this case, we're going to use purple.
Okay.
So that way, if we were to ever see a color of purple, that would indicate that we grabbed a field that had not had its configuration loaded, or possibly configuration loading failed altogether.
Right. We didn't get anything from the XML file.
Alright, so let's drop a field into our style colors. We'll make a public static field of type color, and we'll call it default color. And we'll set it to a value of color.purple. We'll make it public just so that if we wanted to later, we could compare any given color against the default color and just see if they match up or not. Alright, now we can add in all of the actual fields, and I'm going to use a similar method that we used back in the style XML file. I'll type out a template field, duplicate it the number of times that we need, and then we'll go back and fill in all of the naming. So we'll begin with these fields. All of them will be public, static, color fields. We'll name the field for now temp, and we'll set it to the default color.
Easy enough.
Now I'll grab all of these and duplicate them, I think roughly 12 times. So let's see, 1, 12. And now we can go back and put in all of the names. Of course,
Sure.
we'd already covered all of these from the XML file, so I'm simply going to go field by field and drop in the names. Starting with
They do the same thing they did before. This is just giving us access to what we have in our XML file.
Exactly. So from the top we have background. We have text normal. We have text selected, then text score. We have text BPM, track, track title, beat mark,
Beat mark measure. Start mark. Hit line. And you got two more. You still have edit grid and edit cursor.
I see. So we were a few off in the copying.
That's okay.
Let's grab a hit line and let's duplicate it 2 times. Then we'll give ourselves the room to put down edit grid
And edit cursor.
and edit cursor. Alright, that takes care of all of the fields inside of style colors. Now let's address style positions. So we'll have much the same here. We'll have public static fields. Only difference here is that these fields will be vector2 fields.
Sure.
And one other difference is we're not going to make a default position. We'll just use the existing default of vector2's position of 0 and 0.
0 and 0. Okay, sure.
Because that way 0 and 0 will be a nice contrast to 1 and 1. And either one, 0, 0 or 1, 1 will be obvious on screen because we'll have the top left corner of the screen.
Okay.
One final reason that we went out of our way to define a default color is that if we leave a color field to its own default, the problem is we get an alpha channel of 0, which is transparent.
Right.
So that means the failure mode, if you will, is to have the element be invisible.
Yeah, you can't have that.
And so we'd rather have an obvious color instead of text is seemingly not drawable. All right, inside of style positions, we'll do the same thing. We'll type out a temp field, give ourselves enough fields, and then drop in our naming. So all of these fields are going to be public. They will be static. They will all be of type vector2, and our first one is going to be called temp. So
And it looks like you need 7 of them.
All right, so we'll put together 1, 2. Oh, I see what I did when I messed the other one. 7. That should give us 7 fields. And we can begin at the top
Main menu.
with main menu.
I'll just help you out. I'll just read them off your notes for you.
Sure.
Song select. Score players. Score select. Pause menu. Save prompt. And BPM.
All right, that should take care of the fields inside of style positions.
Well, I guess now that we've got that done, we could go ahead and put together the skeleton of methods that we're going to be using later on in the class.
Right, now we need to put together a few methods that will allow us to populate all of these fields from our configuration XML file. So we'll go ahead and let's drop into our style class now. Let's jump in here. Of course, our style class currently has things like texture and font management and all of our texture loading code. Let's drop to the very bottom, right after load texture. And we can add in a few methods here. Let's begin with one called load_config. It will be a public static method, void return, and we'll call this load_config. Load_config is going to be much like our actual config class, and we'll take in a file name. So I'll have string file name, and that will be the name of the XML file to load.
Okay.
All right, we're going to have 2 more methods to help us get everything loaded in. If you'll remember back in config, we had a method called getNodeValue, and then we had a series of value parsing methods. Now we're actually going to utilize these methods, since they are in fact public. We can address these directly from the style class. But since we have so many fields to load in, what we're going to do is just to optimize the amount of code we have to write as we're loading fields, we're going to create 2 helper methods inside of style that are going to be used for directly loading a color and directly loading a position from the XML document. Because if you remember in our config class, we actually nested some of these calls. So we're actually doing a getNodeValue call inside of a parseInt call.
Okay, I got you.
So just to kind of optimize the scenario, since we have so many things we need to get loaded, we'll do these on the side as individual methods.
So we could use getNodeValue if we really wanted to, but for readability's sake, we're using color and position?
Yes, exactly. Primarily for readability, since now that we're outside of config, everything has to be addressed with config. We'd have config dot getNodeValue, config dot parse. And so we now would have an even longer line, more complicated looking.
Gotcha.
So we'll compress some of that by adding separate methods. We're going to add two methods. These are going to be called readStyleColor and readStylePosition. So these will be static. We won't worry about making them public because we're only going to use them inside of the style class. The first will return a color, and this one will be readStyleColor. And readStyleColor is going to take in an XML document to load from. And we'll simply call that parameter XML document. And we're also going to take in a string to say what the path is to the node that we wish to address. So this will be string node path. And the parameter signature there is basically the same as our getNodeValue.
Exactly.
So instead of readStyleColor, actually let's, before we worry about the method body, we'll just do
let's just get our basic methods in place. We can get are you just going to put a default return in there?
Yeah, just to satisfy the compiler for the time being.
Message. Right.
Now we'll have a second one for reading out positions. And since it's going to be the exact same parameter signature, I'm just going to copy our existing readStyleColor, paste that, and change the return type to vector2, and change the method name to readStylePosition. And for the time being, we'll return vector2.0. So very simplistic here compared to config, but that's only because we'll be leveraging a lot of the functionality inside of config.
Sure. So at this point, what have we accomplished? We put together our structs that are going to contain the fields for our various nodes inside of our XML file. We've got our basic methods in place, or the skeleton for those methods. We haven't really filled in the method bodies yet, which let's take a look at doing that in the next video. So I think that's going to wrap things up for this video.